Welcome to another .NET user group with a focus on Blazor from sunny Bournemouth in Dorset, part of the .NET Foundation. Well, it's great that you've been able to join us yet again for another presentation around Azure, .NET and Blazor. So, what have we got in store for you today? Our guest speaker today is Steve Villarello, who will be talking about integrating WhatsApp, SMS and text-to-speech into our Blazor applications. As you may already know, we're a Microsoft partner and actively developing and building Blazor applications. We're also a proud member of the .NET Foundation. We'd like to thank our community sponsor Syncfusion for their community license of their Blazor components and also for their support for our group. Well, we're certainly looking forward to this one. Let's dive right in. Format for this evening. We've got basically what Steve has prepared for us is three presentations. We've got the first one, which is sending WhatsApp over Blazor server, which is really, really cool. The second one is receiving and storing WhatsApp messages over EF via Blazor WebAssembly, which we are really looking forward to. And then we're going to have a little intermission where we'll do a couple of giveaways and a little bit of Blazor news, and then hand back over to Steve for a deep dive. And if I'm right, Steve, that's translating phone call and piping to WebAssembly over SignalR.
Yep.
Awesome. And without further ado, hand over to you, Steve.
Sure. So let me share my screen real quick. I remember how to do that. Oh, it's down here. Every time I use Zoom, I have to remember how to share my screen. It's different in all the apps. Screen 2. There we go. So again, my name is Steve Villarello. I'm the .NET Developer Advocate at Vonage. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about integrating communication APIs into Blazor applications. So like I said before, I've kind of worked across a bunch of different technologies up and down the stack. I've worked on some low-level FPGA code, C, Python, Java. I never really felt quite as at home as I do in the .NET stack, which is why, to me at least, Blazor is so darn exciting. I've never really considered myself a front-end guru. I can structure HTML just fine. I can bubble my way through style sheets, but the freewheeling, manic, ever-evolving nature of JavaScript and its child frameworks has always made it really difficult for me to feel comfortable using it. And that's the really neat thing about Blazor, at least in my mind, is that you can do pretty much everything you need to do in a web application without leaving your .NET comfort zone. Hold on. So I'm going to go over a little bit of agenda first. So when I first built this talk, it was actually meant as sort of an introduction to the multiple flavors of Blazor. And naturally, this group is a little more in tune with the Blazor technology. So I'm going to skip a lot of the preliminaries and jump kind of straight into the demos that I built for this. However, I'm going to start out with just a very brief introduction conceptually of what communications APIs are and what they enable us to do. So I'm the developer advocate at Vonage. So naturally, I'm going to be using Vonage technologies here, which I personally feel are very easy to use. After we cover that, I'm going to actually show you, like we said earlier, how to send a WhatsApp message using Blazor Server. Next, I'm going to show you a demo about receiving, it says SMS there, but it's actually supposed to be WhatsApp messages with Blazor WebAssembly and the Entity Framework. And then finally, after I hand it back over to him for a little bit, I'm going to go through a demo about translating phone calls with Blazor WebAssembly, Azure, and SignalR. So let's start off with a question. What are communication APIs? And more importantly, what do they allow us to do? Well, communication APIs are, for a lack of a better term, a way to communicate with people interacting with your app. These APIs let you do everything from sending or receiving text messages, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Viber messages, in-app messages, You can make phone calls, or you can even build video conferencing applications. In this talk, we're going to be using two of Vonage's APIs, the Messages API and the Voice API. So the Messages API enables you to build omni-channel communications into your applications. You can use these channels like WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Viber, MMS, and of course, SMS too. You can send and receive messages from your customer over these channels, and you can very easily plug them into all sorts of third-party artificial intelligence, machine learning software to do neat things like sentiment analysis and building chatbots across your platforms. Today, we will be sending and receiving WhatsApp messages using the Messages API. And while my code in this talk is purpose-built for sending WhatsApp messages, you could just as easily send Facebook Messenger, Viber, SMS messages just by simply changing a couple of parameters in the request. So the other API I'm going to be using is the Vonage. Enables you to add voice. So we're going to build a service to send WhatsApp messages from our Blazor server app. Now, this WhatsApp service is going to use the Vonage Messages API, like I said. That requires a API private key and an application ID. The private key is an API secret. And ordinarily, I wouldn't have code that's going to be interacting with the client pulling that secret. But because we're in Blazor server and everything is operating on the back end, you can kind of fudge it a little bit more and you can actually use that. So I'm going to add the Vonage package to just a normal Blazor server app. This contains most of the logic that you'll need to run this. And I'm going to add in the app settings file my application ID and my application's private key. Like I said, the private key is its API secret and shouldn't be leaked out. So when we create this WhatsApp service, it's going to look like any other API controller you've ever seen before, except it's not going to take any routing information. And that's because we don't actually need to access it over HTTP because this is a Blazor server application. We're just talking to it from a runtime, but it's still going to have the typical dependency injection hooks that you'd see in any other controller that you might interact with. In this instance, it's just injecting an iConfiguration object, which is going to hold the API secrets that we're going to be using to actually send the message. And so now that we have the configuration injected into our service, we can pretty easily send WhatsApp messages. And this is really all the code that you need to do it. The Messages API allows you to send messages, like I said, over WhatsApp, Viber, SMS, Facebook Messenger, MMS. So you just need to really specify the type of message that you want to create, and then provide the text of the message and send that out as content. So the first thing we need to do is actually to pull in the private key path and the application ID out of our configuration. Those values are created with Vonage and register to an application that you make. And then you link that application to an external account. So for example, WhatsApp with the Vonage APIs or the Vonage dashboard. And from there, from those, we just build a credentials object, which we're going to be using to interface with the Vonage API. These next several lines of code here are just building a request structure that we're going to use to send to the Vonage API. The type of message that we're going to be using will be text. We need to specify the channel that we're sending to and from. In this case, we're using WhatsApp, but you could easily swap out SMS, MMS, Facebook Messenger, Viber, and just send the message onwards. Finally, we're going to specify the URI for the message. In this case, we're actually using the Messages Sandbox, which is a free service that we have at Vonage to help you kind of get integrated with the Messages API before you start using the paid service. So like I said, I like to use this because it's free and pretty easy to get up and running with. With the URI, the credentials, and the request structure, we just use request, we just make the request to send the WhatsApp message using a utility message in the Vonage.net SDK. And we're just going to store the output in the J object and access the message ID, which we're going to return and display. So now that we did this, we now need to go into our startup file and configure the middleware. So we're going to add this WhatsApp service like we would any other piece of middleware. We're just going to call add services.add singleton with the type WhatsApp service, and that's going to provide an injectable WhatsApp service across all of our components. So with that service created, I'm just going in and sort of taking over the Index.razor file. So the first 3 lines of that file are going to be the page directive, which is just telling it that it's its own page. And it's going to be rooted at just the base URL. The second line here is just pulling in that namespace that our WhatsApp service is stored at. And the third line is actually dependency injecting the WhatsApp service into our Blazor component. And then this piece of code here is just building it's not really a form, it's just a pseudo form for us to submit the WhatsApp message. Notice how the to, from, and text fields are bound using a bind directive. And the send WhatsApp method is just bound to an on-click action. Those fields and method are all bound to the code directive section below in the same file. And after clicking the send button, it just invokes our WhatsApp service and sends the WhatsApp message onwards. So I'll just pop in here. So you see in my app settings file, I have my API, my app ID and my private key, which I'm injecting into this WhatsApp service here via the configuration. And then in here, in that same bit of code, just sending the WhatsApp message. So when I fire this up, still using the traditional IIS Express. You can do like 2. I always need to look up this this number. Very bad. Send my WhatsApp message. Send with an ID, and on the other end, I got the actual message from WhatsApp. As you can see, this is just a sandbox API, or the sandbox that I'm using. So that's actually how to send a WhatsApp message. That's all there really is to it. Not a whole lot going on in this application. It's very simple. So let me go back to my slides. Cool. So next, we're actually going to build a WebAssembly app, a Blazor WebAssembly app that's going to receive WhatsApp messages on a hosted ASP.NET Core server, feed them into the entity framework, and then pull them out of the entity framework and display them in our front end. So we just use the .NET new Blazor WASM -n Vonage receive WhatsApp. And you know what? It just strikes me that I'm missing a -HO flag here to make sure it's a ASP.NET hosted server. That's all right. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a model to work off of. That's going to be basically the share contract between the two, the front end and the back end. And so we're just going to define POCO in the shared project. And we're going to be using the server project and the entity framework to manage access to that model. So I also just added entity framework core Entity Framework Core and the SQLite extension, so that I could just use a very basic SQLite database with my core hosted server to perform the read and write operations. We're going to add system component model annotations to the share project, and then we're going to create the actual WhatsApp message class where we're going to store everything. So this little POCO right here will hold the ID, which is the message ID, which is going to be annotated with the key from the attribute or the component model library. And that's just to tell Entity what private key to use when what primary key to use when it's storing it. Then we'll add a to, from, and text fields or properties. And that's actually going to be what's storing the stuff we get from the inbound message, those parameters. And that's really all we need from the perspective of this POCO. Next, we just add a WhatsApp context in the server project. And we add a database set in here to store those WhatsApp messages. And then on configuration, when configuring the entity framework here, it's just going to spin up a database called Vonage WhatsApp DB. And then to actually perform the initial migration and create the actual database, we just run these two .NET EF commands. The entity framework has a special extension in the .NET CLI that you need to install first, but I'm just omitting that here for the sake of simplicity. But yeah, basically the first line here will create the migration file, and the second one will actually run all the migrations to build out the database. And now we just need to go back into our middleware and register this database context so that we can actually access it in the controller that we're about to build. And so with our database context set up and our model created, we're going to go ahead and start building our controller. Now that we, so like I said, now that we have that built, we can actually dependency inject the database into our WhatsApp controller, which is just a standard API controller that you would see in kind of any other ASP.NET app. And essentially, so you're just getting the database context in here, and this controller is going to handle actually receiving the WhatsApp messages from Vonage, and it's also going to handle the request from the Blazor WebAssembly front end to actually perform like the CRUD of actually getting the WhatsApp messages. So this is the method that actually handles the inbound WhatsApp messages from Vonage. If anyone here is familiar with a webhook, the webhook is essentially a unsolicited HTTP request that your server provides access to. And essentially, when an event happens out in the world, like, so for example, I send a WhatsApp message to the sandbox user that we looked at earlier, it's going to take that and it's actually going to construct an HTTP request and send it on to you. So in here, we actually have this route set up so that at the base of our server, /webhooks/inbound messages, it's actually going to parse out a JObject from the request body. And then it's going to create a WhatsApp message, that model that we looked at earlier. It's going to add that message to the database, and then it's going to save those changes, and then just return a 200 to the requester so that it knows that, hey, this server was able to understand my request, and so it could stop sending them. So in the Vonage API dashboard, which is dashboard.nexmo.com, I'll set up the inbound message route that I'll receive messages on. And that will cause Vonage to forward any inbound WhatsApp messages onto my controller. I'm using, I'm not sure if anyone here has heard of NROC. But nrock is a really neat tool that allows you to sort of create tunnels from your local computer out to the open internet so that you can actually make a request over the open internet to your local web server, so you don't have to actually expose anything. But essentially, I'm setting up these nrock endpoints, so it's going to hit my server locally. And then on the other end, we're just going to create a basic get operation it's not going to do anything clever. It's just going to return the first 10 messages from the database. It didn't seem to make any sense to really show any more complexity than that. But yeah, it's just taking the database and taking the first 10 off of it. And then we actually get onto the Blazor part of this. We're going to set up the front end. Now, mind you, this is all going to be .NET code that runs on the browser. And we don't have, unlike Blazor Server, we don't have access to our backend directly from the runtime. But the nice thing about, at least in my mind, about Blazor WebAssembly is it actually makes it really easy to access your API controllers from your front end. That's something that I really like about it. So in this bit here, we're again taking over that Index.razor file. We're adding the shared project in here, and then we're going to inject an HTTP client. And that HTTP client, as you might imagine, is going to handle the HTTP requests to our backend. And so in here, I'm just going to throw a basic table to just display the information that we're getting. You know, it comes with the headers, the message ID, the from, to, and text, which are just the fields that were in the shared object that we spoke to earlier. And then this for each loop in here is just going to go through each message and this messages collection I'm about to define and print it out into the table. And this final bit here is really all the code that you're going to need to actually grab the messages from the server. And so it's only going to grab it on initialization. So when the page loads up, it's going to initialize. And it's going to just perform this get from JSON async request, which to my mind is actually one of the neatest features of Blazor. At least maybe I'm just being simplistic here, but essentially you don't have to do any kind of marshalling or conversion because it just kind of does everything for you. So you just tell it to get this stuff from JSON. And earlier when we were returning this is converting it to JSON on its way down. So this get from JSON essentially just creates those shared objects and stores them in this messages list. And that allows us to present it fairly easily to the user. So I'll just show this bit off. I'll hand back over. So, like I said earlier, we have our 3 projects here: the Blazor, the server, the shared code, and the client. Server legitimately only has this one simple little class that stores everything. The server has the database context that we spoke to. It has a startup file, which injects the database. And then it has just an API controller that gets the inbound message and stores it in our database, and then retrieves messages whenever it's requested up front. And then in our client, we just have our Index.razor file, which has the table in it and just reads the messages very quickly off of the backend. So I'm going to start this. And assuming nothing goes awry, show this. So I had one message in here already. So I'm going to send another message from WhatsApp. And I'll show you, I have my little nrock server running here that's just getting pinged. Apparently I'm just displaying 502s in here. but I'm going to send this a message. Hey, this is really Steve speaking. Yeah, and I should have probably hooked this up, but I'm just going to send. And you see it just came in here. It hasn't refreshed yet. If I refresh it, here it is. So yeah, I mean, that's the first 2 bits. So I think it's time to hand back over.
Thanks, Steve. That was awesome. In terms of adding the Vonage packages to an existing app, obviously we've seen the template there with the scaffolding. Is it just a case of a couple of NuGet packages, or
Yeah.
what's the process?
It's just .NET add package Vonage, and that's it. Yeah, it's simple.
Awesome.
And we have so if anyone's interested in our code base, it's all open source. So I'll just drop it in the chat real quick. See if I can find the chat. There it is. That's actually our code base. And we just recently transitioned from Nextmode to Vonage. So the old NuGet package is a nextmode.c# .client package, but the new one is just Vonage. So that's our NuGet package.
Very cool. And in terms of the kind of sandbox environment, and then moving into a potential kind of production scenario, what is the pricing like for someone just to kind of get started?
Yeah, so like WhatsApp in particular is an interesting one, because you have to go through like a third-party provider like us to get it. Essentially, you need to. It's mostly intended for like enterprise folks, but the nice thing about the sandbox is it's free to use while you're actually getting spun up. But once you actually get to production, I think it's like here. Let me just go to the messages pricing, because we have a pricing page for this. Like per message is very small, but there's like a one-time startup fee where we actually get the clusters all set up for you, and that's like $1,000 or €1,000. And then like based on capacity, it's several €100 a month to keep up. Like I said, WhatsApp is a strange one because it's kind of expensive, because it's predominantly used for like large enterprises. But yeah, like Facebook Messenger is basically free to get set up with. Viber is similar. I think you have to contact our sales team to get set up with Viber. SMS is like, I want to say number in the UK is like a euro or something like that.
It sounds like a deal can be done.
Yeah, usually the sales department are the ones who set it up. The WhatsApp ones, at least.
Yeah. So we asked if we're recording the session. We are actually recording. For those that would like to kind of see again in a bit more detail, we'll be popping the recording onto YouTube over the coming week for everyone. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. If we start from top to bottom, Steve, would you like to take the first one?
Yeah, sure. So Marizo asked, if one can send message from user ID to user ID, is it simple to send spam messages? Probably there are limits to send messages this way for production purposes. So WhatsApp in particular actually has, WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger have this concept called a customer care window. So you have to be coming from a known WhatsApp account. Like you have to register with WhatsApp Business. So you're like a trusted user already. But also, like a customer, you can only send the customer like a non-structured message inside of a 24-hour customer care window. So after they message you, you are then allowed to message them for 24 hours afterwards. Alternatively, if you want to contact them outside of that window, you have to receive opt-in from that customer. And then that customer, you can send that customer what are called templates. which are these structured messages that WhatsApp actually has to approve beforehand. So like you can send you could do like a person-to-person like customer service use case, but the customer has to originate it. Otherwise, like you're limited to these templated messages specifically so people get like messages that they're interested in and that are useful to them. And WhatsApp really doesn't want spam on their platform. Like the SMS carriers will start locking numbers down if you start spamming people, and it's the same way with WhatsApp. I'm sure that they have a process for like locking down people that are spamming people. And so the second question is also an excellent question. And if we use webhooks to save messages, what is the preferred way to secure the webhook? And so there's two things. So there's the preferred way to secure the webhook to make sure you're not getting and not processing erroneous messages is by checking the signature of the inbound webhook. So each webhook that you get from Vonage, I'll actually show you. Over the Messages API has this bearer header in it. And this header here is for the authorization. And this maps to SHA-256 JWT that's generated from the payload of your message. So the payload of this message and the signing key. So you sign the payload with essentially the signing key, and it produces this JWT, which you can use to validate that this indeed did come from a trusted user. And hey, someone didn't intercept this message and is just playing it into my server to cause chaos. And as a matter of fact, let me drop a resource in the chat here. Oh, you know what? Does it have any of my stored stuff because it's using the Kestrel Chrome? I will. So this article here essentially goes over how to validate the signatures of inbound webhooks. Do you have to have a physical mobile phone between your code and sending SMS messages to clients? No. You just purchase a Vonage LVN, it's a long virtual number, or there's also like app to user use cases where you might have to buy a short code, or the carriers are adding like this new thing called 10DLC. If you're particularly interested in SMS, actually, it's not really that difficult to get up and running with either. Let me try and probably fail to change my code on the fly to send a SMS message instead of a WhatsApp message. That's, I mean, if anyone minds, does anyone mind?
I'm sure we appreciate it.
So they just added 2FA into my into the dashboard, and now I need to go through this step too. Which is a good thing, but so I just need to find my virtual number, honestly. So if we go back and do, let me shut this one down real quick. And let me go into this one. And I'm going to say, I can't go here. I need to go to the other endpoint. So I just need to change this URI real quick to the actual production one. Okay, that's easy. and then I can fire this up. No. I just need to change these 2 lines to SMS. I need to change the URI, and that should do it. We're going to see if my code fails in real time, which it probably will, but that's okay. This is safe space, right? And yeah, I got the message. So just like, that's my test number. Oh, hold on 1 sec. Let me just change my video background because it doesn't like that. So there you go, like that.
Hey.
Down there, not focused, not quite focused. All right, it's there. I promise you it's there. It just isn't focusing well. But yeah, like that's how easy it is to switch between them. Actually. Back over to you, Carl.
Super. Thanks, Steve. That's nice insight. And you know, as long as you've got the paid account, I mean, basically you can get up to speed pretty quickly. That looks pretty painless.
Well, so like actually the sign up is free and everything is pretty much pay per consumption. So like you don't have to have like a standing account with us. WhatsApp and Viber are weird use cases because you actually have to sign up with specific accounts with those 2 providers. So like they usually do require like a paid account to get set up with WhatsApp. Yeah, pretty much everything else you could just do pay per use.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So we'll take a brief intermission. Let Steve take a drink and have a little rest for a second. I think it's first giveaway time. So let's get the wheel spinning and see how we're getting on. Well done, Graham. We'll take your details if you just ping me privately in the chat with your email, and you've won some Blazor stickers, which, yeah, straight from C# Fritz's show. So they're kind of one-offs, so you shouldn't see them anywhere else. So yeah, enjoy. Cool. So a little bit of news. For the last month or so. Interestingly, if anyone would like to, and this is actually how I found Steve on the web, is through his blog. I was reading some articles, and he's done a really good job. I hope you don't mind me saying, Steve, in terms of breaking some of these use cases down. And there's a bit more kind of background reading if you'd like to do. I know. There's a couple of comments in the chat that this is moving on at quite a pace. So, you know, there's an opportunity with the source code that's been pasted into the chat, some of these blog articles, and obviously a rerun of this video as well. It should be quite good, but I would encourage you to kind of have a look at Steve's blog. Nice polished articles and some really good detail there. So we've got the .NET Conf coming up between the 10th and 12th of November. And the reason I just wanted to highlight it was because Blazor is really a kind of first-class citizen of this conference. We've got the initial kind of .NET 5 Trailblazer talk, which is going to talk about all the new features, the CSS isolation, which is really cool. Also improved APIs, the way that we actually bring JSON back and forwards, performance improvements as well, particularly for Blazor WebAssembly. There's definitely some really cool stuff in this one. But, you know, there's quite a few talks. If we just kind of flick through this search on Blazor, we'll see here, this talk is about integrating Blazor with ASP.NET Core. As Steve pointed out before, MVC applications are, you know, one of those types of patterns with ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core where you kind of really think, you know, this is a really solid pattern. And this is extended with Blazor with that mix of the two. So you've got your MVC app, or you've got your ASP.NET Core Razor Pages application, but actually maybe you want to mix and match the two, or maybe you want to migrate slowly into the Blazor world. Well, this is the talk for you, followed by some blog articles that you can search for on all of these speakers. And what you'll find is that most of these speakers, the talks have been given before, and there are repos that exist already, but obviously this will be a nice polished version for the .NET conference, so definitely worth a watch. But for some background reading, you can probably find some information on the blogs as well. I think that's going to be a particularly good one. And in kind of supporting that, you've got the gRPC one there, get your jam on using Jamstack with serverless. I thought this was quite interesting, a bit of DevOps here in terms of deployments, client and server side. And then there's another one that I saw, which I wanted to highlight. Migrating WinForms apps to Blazor as well. It is a common scenario that we're facing. We're working with these technologies with clients, and it is a migration path that's interesting. The one that I'm really looking forward to is this one. And I did actually follow the article from Florian talking about micro front ends with Blazor. So we've got microservices, and then to accompany or to complement that, we've got micro front ends. And Blazor is a really good candidate for this. And you'll find it really interesting. There's a YouTube video which accompanies this blog article. I definitely recommend having a look. I've got a URL list of items from this evening, so I'll just pop that into the chat for you, so that you've got that to kind of take away. But in terms of the micro front end story, there's a really nice YouTube video that Florian did in the Munich .NET meetup. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at that if you get the opportunity to. But obviously there'll be a really nice polished version. But quite often what you find with the conference is that you get a nice rounded kind of talk, but it doesn't always go into all the detail. Whereas sometimes in the .NET and some of the YouTube videos, you get a bit more of that background. So when time is short, they'll often kind of cut it off in the conf. So definitely worth looking out for that. One of the other ones which is coming up in the .NET Conf is the use of Octane. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to kind of look into that modular framework, which is centered around Blazor. Sean Wildermuth and the team that put together .NET Nuke, pretty much the ones behind this. And if you look at the code, you'll see an awful lot of the kind of patterns which enabled them to get really up to speed so quickly by leveraging some of that code and the patterns that were used there kind of previously. So some really interesting things kind of on the horizon. Another thing which you may or may not be aware of is the jitter for ASP.NET Blazor. definitely worth adding yourself to this if you want to kind of keep up to date. You do get a lot of messages if you sign up, but there really is some quite interesting content coming out of here, and certainly if you've got a question about something that you're trying to do, it's quite possible that it's already been answered. So
Or you want to contribute.
yes, exactly. Even better. Exactly, and so we definitely encourage you to check that out. Really, really cool. Yeah, just one more thing to note for next month. We do have another presentation, which I know some of you have already signed up for, but that is a Blazor booking application, which is something that my little company have been working on for a local camper van company. And it's really just some of the observations that we've observed trying to get a Blazor application into prod. So that's actually due to go live in January. So we are getting quite close. So be interesting to kind of share some insights and get some feedback from you guys as well on what you think to that. So you're more than welcome to attend that. Cool. So I think it's now time to hand the stage back to Steve for his in-depth look into sending and receiving messages over SignalR. Just before we do, have we got any more questions that we'd like to raise before we hand the stage back to Steve? So Steve, if you're happy to take the stage, over to you.
Sounds good. So now that last application we looked at was pretty neat. I mean, you get to send and receive, oh goodness, sorry, one sec. I'm like messing with my speaker notes right now and everything is, there we go. Sorry about that. There we go. So like I said, that was pretty neat. You get to do some pretty basic CRUD with Blazor WebAssembly. And we were able to run all our app like completely in C#, which is amazing to me at least. But honestly, I don't actually think the last application I showed you is really that interesting. And that's because it's not particularly reactive. You send a message, and after it's received, you have to refresh the page to actually get an update from it. So I'm actually going to spice it up a bit, and I'm going to add some life to it with some SignalR. I'm going to be doing something a bit ambitious, but I think it'll start to really show off the seamlessness of the integration between client-side Blazor and server-side ASP.NET. So now I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to build a real-time speech translator that will take input from a dial-in PSTN call and push the translation out to the front end. So we're going to start this the same way we started our last project, except we're going to be calling it Speech Translator Blazor. So .NET New Blazor Wasm -ho-n Speech Translator Blazor. So this demo, we're going to have a user dial in into our service via a standard PSTN line. When that dial in is received, we're going to have some logic that is going to tell the front end, or going to tell us to forward a WebSocket connection to our .NET Core server, and it's going to pipe all the audio from that PSTN call to our server. Then we're going to take the audio from that call, and we're going to pipe it all up to the Azure Cognitive Services using the Microsoft Speech SDK. And once the Cognitive Services respond via the Speech SDK with a translation, we're going to take that translation, wrap it up in an object, and then pipe it over SignalR back to our front end. And we're going to display the text that was generated to our user. Also, we're going to actually take that translation and we're going to convert the translation back to audio and push it back over our WebSocket to the person dialed in so that they can hear the translation. So let's start out by creating a basic data structure that's going to hold our translations. We'll give it a unique ID, which is going to be whatever the ID of the dialed in call is. Then we'll give it text, a language that the user is speaking, and a language that we're going to translate to. Next, we're going to define a translation hub. This is the SignalR hub our client and server is going to use to keep up to date on all the translations being broadcast down. Now, SignalR hubs can get pretty intricate and have some decent logic for filtering out the right person to send a particular message down to. But for the sake of simplicity here, I'm just going to leave this as an empty class, and it's just going to send down to all of the clients that are subscribed to this hub every translation that it gets. But know that you can parse it down more. So now that we have the hub defined, we're going to need to configure the middleware for our app. So part of this is going to be a bit longer. So we're just going to start off with the SignalR bits. We need to map the hub to a particular route. So we're going to map that hub, that SignalR hub, to /TranslationHub. Then we're going to need to add SignalR to the list of services for this app with services.addSignalR. Next, we need to configure the WebSockets themselves. And here we're enabling the WebSockets in the middleware. We're telling them to expect a buffer of size 640 bytes. And that's because we're going to be using the audio codec 16 kilohertz linear PCM. So that's the message size that we're going to be looking at here, 640 bytes per message. With that done, we're going to have to manually map an endpoint from the use endpoint delegates in the Startup.cs. This is a little weird, but it's actually necessitated because of the way that Blazor WebAssembly is hosted at the root of the server's app. And we explicitly defined a /WS route and pass an asynchronous delegate to handle the upgrade to a WebSocket. We need to pull the SignalR hub that we just created and just added from our application services so that it can be used in our translator. And that's what this line is doing right here. This will allow the translator, each time it pulls down a new translation, to broadcast the translations out to every hub or every client. Then we'll create the WebSocket connection, which will upgrade the connection to a WebSocket and lets us run our translation code. Finally, we'll create a new translation engine, which is the class that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And we're going to pass the upgraded WebSocket and the HTTP context into that. And then we're also going to configure, we're going to pass in the actual hub context that we just got from that bit right there. And that's going to give it all the data that it needs to actually broadcast translations down to its clients. So next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to build a voice controller for inbound calls. Again, this is going to be an API controller, and it's going to be handling inbound webhooks from Vonage. So every time someone makes a call to our server, it's going to fire off this webhooks answer. And in here, we're going to construct what's called an NCCO. Now that stands for Nexmo Call Control Object. Nexmo was the API company that Vonage bought out, which is where a lot of the Nexmo branding stuff comes from. In here, we're going to create a WebSocket endpoint, which is the endpoint that the call is going to be connected to when the answer happens. The URI is going to be the URI that we want to point it to. again, I'm using nrock here, so that doesn't always play nice with secured WebSockets. So typically you would be using WSS as the scheme here. I'm just using WS so I don't have to worry about that. And notice how this same root right here, /WS at the end here, is the same route that we defined earlier in the when we were configuring the middleware. The content type is going to define how the audio data is structured. We can choose from either an 8 kilohertz or 16 kilohertz linear PCM. I found that when you're doing translations, 16 kilohertz, the extra granularity does tend to help and work better. And finally, we're going to pass in this translation object into the headers. When we upgrade the WebSocket and start reading the messages off of it, the first message that we're going to get is a JSON object that's embedded in these headers here. This makes it really easy to transmit metadata through the WebSocket. In this case, we're going to be providing it the unique ID of the call. So that's the request queries UUID. The language that we're going to be speaking, which is I speak American English, ENUS. In the language that we're going to be translating to, the first time I gave this talk, I gave it to a group in India, so I had the translation language be Indian Hindi. And then we're going to take that NCCO, we're going to take that action here, this WebSocket connect action, we're going to add it to our NCCO, and then return a JSON stringified version of that NCCO to the requester, which in this case is Vonage. So next is the translation engine. And I think I'm going to go through about 90% of the class. I'm going to leave out the constructor and stuff. But this is actually where it gets a little in depth. So this is the beginning of the receive audio on WebSocket method that I spoke about earlier. That's in the middleware. That's this right here. So after we've upgraded the WebSocket, we call this receive audio on WebSocket with the HTTP context and the actual WebSocket itself. At this point, like I said, we've already upgraded to a WebSocket. So we're just going to grab the first message off of this WebSocket and store it in our output buffer here. And then we're going to create a the configuration object. That's the translation by deserializing this first message. Because as I mentioned to you earlier, that first message is going to be the headers that we got here. It's going to be this object turned into JSON. So we can just parse that back out from here. Next, we're going to actually start up the translation engine as well as configure the rest of this translation engine. Now, while the messages that we pull off of the WebSocket isn't a closed message, we're going to be continually reading off of the WebSocket. And we're going to write the message that we get from the WebSocket into what's called an input stream. The input stream, what that is essentially another WebSocket that the Microsoft Speech SDK, which interacts with the Azure backend, opens up this other WebSocket to the Azure Cognitive Services and pipes up all the audio to that. And after a set period of time or when it detects silence, translation events are going to fire for the audio that's being sent through. Now, WebSockets, to those of you unfamiliar with the protocol, are two-way. So whenever we actually write audio back, so we can actually write audio back into them. In this case, since we're talking on a phone, when we write audio back into the WebSocket, it comes actually back to the user, and the user can hear it. So this bit of code here is actually embedded in the main while loop, and it uses a concurrent queue of audio that whenever we get audio translated, we'll write the audio back into the queue between reading messages. So this method here, as the name suggests, kicks off the speech translator. It sets up a translation config and the speech synthesizer config. Registers this recognize or recognized event and actually kicks off the translation. And so this recognize or recognized event is what fires every time Azure detects speech or detects a translation event. And so interestingly, the actual language that it translates, it requests the BCP47 encoded language. So like, what is it? HI-IN is India. And essentially what they pass back to you is it just says what the language is, so HI. So I have to split that out of here. Next, and then like if you get that, that's actually the translation. So that's the text that it translated. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that translation and I'm going to turn it into an audio buffer that I can then write back across. And then here we're actually using, again, the speech SDK's speech synthesizer. So we're taking the speaker text async translation and then pull the audio data off of the result of that. Next, we'll actually construct a translation object from the metadata from our input and from the text that we got as a result of this operation. Next, we're actually going to take that translation object and we're going to send that translation to all of the clients subscribed to our SignalR hub. And we're going to fire off this receive translation event in all of them. And finally, we're going to take that text-to-speech audio and we're going to enqueue that text-to-speech audio into our concurrent queue. So now that we've added all that logic to actually translate the phone calls and manage the translation and send it on to us, we're going to build the final bit of this, which is the front end of our application, which thanks to Blazor is going to be pretty darn simple, honestly. So we're actually going to build an independent component for this. We'll call it a translation component. We'll use the SignalR client library and the share project in this. Then we'll inject a navigation manager object, which will help us route through to all of our hubs. And finally, because we're building a hub connection, we're going to have this component implement iDisposable so it can clean itself up afterwards. We'll add a similar table structure here to what we saw in the last one. We're basically displaying all of the stuff from the input. And in here, instead of looping through a list, it's going to be looping through a dictionary. And the reason we're using a dictionary will be apparent in a moment, but essentially it's just displaying the information from here. And then in our oninitialized async method, instead of reading some data off of our server, we're actually going to be setting up our hub connection, which is going to tie back to the translation hub. So if you see, it's actually using a hub connection builder with the URL navigation manager to absolute URI / translation hub, which points it to our translation hub. We're going to build that connection. Then we'll register to this receive translation event, which is the event that the translation engine is going to broadcast down every time it gets a new translation event. And then if our translations already contains that UUID, we just append the text from the newest translation to that translation. Otherwise, we just add the new translation to our translations dictionary. And then finally, also we call the state has changed, which is just a a lifecycle event to tell the Blazor component that the state of the component has changed, and then it needs to go through and update the rendering of the component. And then finally, outside of that event listener, we will add a call to start the hub connection, which will connect us to the SignalR service on our server. And then outside of this, we also have the iDisposable pattern implemented. So it'll actually clean up this hub connection when this translation component tears down. Finally, in the Index.razor file, we'll just replace its contents with the translation component tag, which will get it to render. And then, yeah, that was it for that one. I will show that now. Well, let me stop this last one so it doesn't interfere. Speech translator Blazor. You know what? I probably shouldn't use IIS Express for this. IIS Express and NRock don't necessarily play nice. Let's tell it to use Kestrel. So again, like we have the just a translation model here in our startup file. We add SignalR. We map our translation hub. Yep. And then we have all the logic to essentially set up the WebSockets and tell it to start up. And then inside of this bigger class here, we essentially have some constants in here for like the sample size and stuff like that. And we have essentially just a giant while loop that iterates through every message that it gets off and translates it. So yeah. Anyway, let me just call myself on this. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Parikshan 1, 2, 3.
Hello, my name is Steve Lorello, and I'm calling from Vonage.
Namaste, मेरा नाम Steve Manoval है और मैं Vonage से बुला रहा हूँ.
And I'm actually here to talk about how awesome Blazor is.
और मैं वास्तव में यहाँ हूँ के बारे में बात करने के लिए कैसे भयानक रंगीन जैकेट है.
So yeah, pretty darn cool. I mean, like the things you can do. So yeah, that's I mean, so yeah, that's pretty much it. I really hoped you all kind of enjoyed learning about, building some communication APIs into your Blazor applications. It's pretty neat. I mean, I guess I already did my bio at the beginning, but like I said, I'm the .NET developer advocate for Vonage. Been a .NET developer for about 6 years. On my nights and weekends, I study computer perception and robotics at the Georgia Institute of Technology, go Yellow Jackets. And I'm also a graduate assistant there. I help teach a graduate class on building algorithmic models for equity trading, which is a lot of fun. You can follow me at slorello on Twitter. My personal blog is slorello.com, and Carl shared my work blog, which they have a lot of the same content on them. Like most of my blog posts are originated from work. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I've kind of already told you about Vonage. Let me just show you this cute little jingle. I like to show it at when I give talks. Of course, I'm muting my microphone.
These eyes, not as good as our API. Now we're talking.
But yeah, so like, as you can tell, we have all sorts of communication APIs that we provide. We do have a coupon code if any of you want to sign up. It's this right here. It's €10, €10 worth of credit. Like I said, pretty much everything is pay per use. Sending an SMS message is, I think, some fraction of a cent. sending a WhatsApp message after you're configured is like even less than that. Just obviously the getting spun up and stuff is expensive. Phone calls are billed per minute or billed per second, I think, and they're fairly inexpensive. But yeah. So all the stuff I showed you is available in GitHub. If you look at the blog that Carl posted earlier, that last sample, I do actually have a full blog post kind of going over how to build that from a conception in Azure to actual, like what we were just showing there. Does anybody have any questions?
So, Steve, thanks so much for that. I mean, we're getting some great feedback in the chat there. Really clever stuff. Excellent talk. That's amazing. It's pretty awesome. And it really is awesome. And what I thought was cool about the kind of Blazor element was just actually how little code was required, right? Just, I mean, I don't want to say simple, but it actually was relatively simple compared to obviously the work that's gone in the back end.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, so to my mind, like I said, I've never been a front end guru. All right, I probably never will be. You see those memes of like back end developers being trampled by front ends. I'm the back end developer that gets trampled by the front end. But what I really like about Blazor is that it enables you to do so much with so little, and you get to do so much with just like a little bit of C# code, which I, as a like a dyed-in-the-wool .NET developer, am very comfortable using. So yeah, like it's pretty neat that like you're able to do all this stuff, and it is really very simple and straightforward. Like the front end bits are like, oh, like here's some front end code that you can use to display this really cool thing that we're doing in the back end.
Yeah. Steve, what are you working on kind of Blazor wise, you know, next? Have you got anything kind of on the horizon in terms of next steps?
Yeah. So we're actually putting our roadmaps together for next year at work. I'm a developer advocate, so like we don't have like the same production workloads that a lot of developers do. We kind of just help enable people to do stuff. So probably I will be building some more demos, but something that I think will be very useful. The SDK that I showed you earlier has data structures for pretty much everything you'd want to do for using the Vonage APIs, but you can't use them in Blazor WebAssembly. I mean, you can, but like it doesn't make any sense because it's the SDK is intended for server-side use. So like when it was originally put together, no one thought like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have this whole package be like 9 meg. So people can download it into their front end. So something I'm interested in doing is actually taking our data structures and splitting them out. So there's just like a couple kilobytes added on. So like you can more easily integrate it. But yeah, like, you know, I help maintain like the SDKs that we have. You know, I build content, talk to folks like you. So yeah, I'm definitely not done with Blazor. It's an awesome framework. Just
Yeah, superb. Cool. Do we have any more questions before we jump into another wheel of giveaways? Cool. I mean, you know, I think we are pretty much speechless this evening from that presentation. It was really awesome. It's only when you see it really that the penny completely drops. And although there's a lot of detail there, Steve, you know, when these scenarios arise in our development path, I think then is where you really kind of, you know, hone in on the detail, and I'm sure that the content in this presentation will be certainly you know, revisited. But I think what's lovely is that with .NET Core, with Blazor, you know, it's the same patterns over and over again in terms of the services, the dependency injection, the communication. Obviously, you're using the SignalR client library there. But we were able to build on things that we can kind of pretty much learn once or twice, and then kind of harness and get into the detail, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know how much you've used SignalR in the past, but it's really come a long way in the last 5 years. It really has. It's quite something. It's so much easier to use, especially with Blazor. Like, it's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Okay. Well, feel free to still pop any questions you've got in the chat. Shall we jump to our wheel and let's do another prize giveaway? Shall I just take the screen? Okie dokie, here we go. Congratulations, Alex. I think we've seen you on every occasion, I think, since the first show, and I think that's your first win, isn't it? Excellent, congratulations. So you've got an Amazon gift card coming. So if you want to just privately pop your email into the chat for me, and I'll make sure that you get a link, something gets sent off. Congratulations to you. Super. Well, I think we'd really like to express our gratitude to Steve for that really interesting talk. Quite detailed, but I think something that definitely we'll be coming back to revisit. And super cool tech as well, and we'd love to have you again at some point to take us through another exciting presentation in the future.
I got to figure out how to. We have a video API as well that lets you build video conferencing apps, and what I really like to do is see if I can build a integration between WASM and our video conferencing API. I don't know how practical it is because I don't think that WebAssembly supports our WebRTC yet, but we'll see. Maybe in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, something to kind of look forward to. Nice forward thinking. Well, I'd like to express thanks to everyone for this evening, and I think we'd just like to say thank you, Steve, for a great couple of presentations.
Anytime.
If you have a technical topic that others could benefit from, whether it be .NET, Azure, or focus on Blazor, then reach out for a future presentation. Well, if you're enjoying the content in our .NET Foundation user group, then please subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the bell icon to get notifications of when we upload new content. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's presentation as much as we did, and we look forward to seeing you next time.